So in this video we're going to be looking at the haunched mortise and tenon joint, a strong alternative to your traditional halving joints that's almost entirely invisible because it's enclosed within the wood. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Right, so as with any woodworking project, the first thing we want to do is mark out our sizes. So I've already selected my face side and face edge, and this is the end of my wood here. So I'm going to want to mark in the distance that I'm going to perform this joint on. So in our case, we are marking in 24mm this time. So let's take our steel rule. From our line that we've squared off on the end of the wood, we're going to measure in 24. Let's just make a little dot right there. Take our tri-square, square it across. In our case, we need to take this all the way around. So the next thing we're going to have to do is mark out the width of our tenon. Now this is similar to what we have done in the past with our halving joints. At this time we're going to take wood off of both sides, leaving a bit in the middle. So we're going to need our marking gauge for this. And we're going to set our marking gauge up to 6mm. So we're going to take this around. It's marking out. Six millimeters in from one side, and we're going to go 6mm in from the other. So there we go. As we have done before, let's just take a nice sharp pencil. We could follow those grooves just to make sure that they're nice and obvious and we don't miss them when we come to cut things out. So this joint that we're going to do actually has one added feature here. We're going to add what's called a haunch. That is a little kind of notch taken out of the corner here. Reason being is it allows us to make the joints a little bit stronger by giving us a little bit more gluing surface without weakening the pocket that we're going to be putting this into. It also means that you can only put the piece of wood in one orientation because the haunch will always go on one side. You can't put it in back to front by accident. So in our case, what we're going to do is we're going to measure 8mm back from our shoulder line that we marked out. So I'm just going to line up 8mm on my steel rule and make a mark at 0. We'll square that across. We'll take it over the top. And we'll take it around the side as well. So in order to mark the width of the haunch that we're taking off, we can set up our marking gauge to 12mm this time. And we can carry that up along the side, over the top, and on the other side as well. Once again, we can go over this with our pencil just to make sure the mark is nice and obvious and we're not going to miss it. So now for something that might be slightly familiar if you've seen the previous videos. If you haven't, I suggest you go and watch them. I'll put a link up in the corner for you. We are going to saw down from the end. Now, we do not want to saw directly on the pencil marks that we've made. We want to saw just to the waist side of them, okay? As close as you can get, but if you're in any doubt of your sawing capabilities, just move about 1mm away and then cut down from the end here. Okay, so I'm put this in my vise at an angle so that I can watch both of these lines at the same time. If I try to cut down from the top, I can only really watch the top line and I can't see whether or not my saw is going squint. So by watching both of these lines, I should be able to keep the cut nice and straight. So I'm working my way down this back edge first. Making sure that's where I want it to be. And then we'll make sure the top goes likewise. And then once we've got a little bit of a groove established, which we do now, we can start to just kind of rock back and forth between the two to get our cut into the perfect place. Now, when we've done this kind of thing before, we've normally cut our shoulders first and then gone for this, but I actually need these two bits on the side here. So I'm doing it from the end first, and we'll cut the shoulders later. So that's about down to where I want it to be. Now we're going to switch it over. And we'll do the one remaining side. So once again, we don't want to be bang on the line, we want to be just next to it. So let's just make sure I can see what I'm doing here. And that way we'll make sure that we're not going to go over the line. So I've got a little bit of a kind of groove established now, so that's where I want to go. I can bring this back in line with the other cut. That's looking good. So last of all, we stick it dead upright in our vise. And we'll remove the little bit of wood that's left in the middle. We're almost there. To look good on that side, a little bit more on that side. And that ought to do us. So we do the exact same trick with the other side. This is why we didn't take the sides off at this stage, because what we need to do is we need to actually cut down this line here. If we take the side off, we'd have lost that mark. We wouldn't have known where to stop, we wouldn't have known how far in to cut from. So we're going to cut in from the end in this part. So we're going to do the same kind of trick as we had done. It's not as important because it's not as wide a cut this time. We can just kind of follow that line, but going to do the same trick anyway. So let's place it in our vise. Again, making sure that you are next to the line, not bang on it. Make sure you're following both the line along the top and the line down the side. So that's nice there. That's nice along the top. Let's quickly just establish a groove on the other side. And this is going to act as a guide for our saw for when we cut in from the top. To make sure that our saw goes exactly where we want it to and nowhere else. There we go. And the last thing we can do is simply take this notch out by cutting across the way. Once again, line this up so we're just to the waist side of the line. And we can cut straight in. And remove those little chunks there. That is the haunched part of our tenon complete. All we need to do now is take off either side of the wood. We can do that by either setting up a fence or knifing and notching from either line and cutting down to our two lines that we've already cut here. Once we've finished cutting out our haunch from our tenon, we can start cutting our shoulders. And we can do this using our fencing method that we showed last time out. So if you set up a scrap piece of wood that you know got a nice square edge on, up against your line, making sure that you can barely see the pencil line that's there, okay? You don't want it to have this too far back, you want it to be right up to the edge of that pencil line. And this is going to guide your saw to exactly where you want it to be. So let's just nibble away at this. And there we go. That's our first piece done. Let's flip this over and do the other side. With our two sides removed and our haunch cut, our tenon is essentially complete at this point. We could go and tidy it up a little bit with a chisel, but we won't for now. We'll wait until we've cut our mortise, we'll see how the fit is, and we'll adjust accordingly. So now to turn our attention to our other piece of wood, and this is where we're going to put our mortise. That is the square hole we're going to have to cut into this style here to accept the rail. So we're going to have to mark the width of our haunch back the way first of all, which was 12mm. So we'll make a little mark at 12. Without moving the ruler, I'm just going to add on the width of the wood as well, which was 35. So there's our mark at 35. we'll square these two across. And that is all the marking we need to do at this stage. We don't need to go down the sides because this is going to be housed within the wood here. We're not going to see anything on either side of this. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to mark out the width of the mortise. So just as we did before with our tenon, we'll set this up to 6mm, and in between these two lines we'll mark on our width. So I've carried the lines from where our mortise is going to go up to the end of the wood because we're going to need that later on. But for now, we're just going to be worried about this section here. Now the way we're going to do this by hand is we're going to need a mallet and we're going to need a mortise chisel. And we're going to start roughly in the middle of this section here. And we're going to work our way in little layers back the way from the middle to the edge. Not exactly at the edge, maybe one cut from the end, a couple of millimeters most. And then we'll go back the other way, back to the other side, again leaving a little gap, because what we're going to do is we're going to take the last two cuts out in one go. We're just removing the wood in the center section here just now. So let's get to this. Let's take our mortise chisel, let's give that a good wee whack. So 4 hits, and then I'm just going to go back maybe 2mm in between the lines. Last one. Okay, and then we'll switch our chisel around so it's flat side out the way the whole time. Okay, and once we've got kind of our first layer done, we can just scrape all those broken bits of wood out. You are better off raking it back the way rather than trying to lever it out. And we keep working our way down layer by layer until we get to the bottom. So you may be asking, how do we know when to stop chiseling? Now the easiest way for us to do this is to essentially set up a depth stop on our chisel. If we go and take our steel rule and measure the depth of the cut we need to go to, which in this case is 24mm, to the end of the chisel, we'll put a bit of masking tape on the chisel at that point, and we will know that once our chisel gets down to the point where the masking tape meets the wood, we've gone deep enough and we can stop chiseling. We can test fit this and see how it goes. If we need to take a little smidge more out, we can take a little smidge more out. But this will give us, this one takes a wee while, so we're just going to crack on with it and see how it goes. So the last thing that we are going to have to do, now that we've removed the majority of the wood from this gap here, is take off the two sides that we left earlier on. So we're going to pop our chisel directly onto the line that we want to cut on. And we're going to take this all the way to the full depth. Making sure that this is running straight down the way. You don't want to be coming in at an angle. Okay? Now that's sorted. We'll go to the other side. Now the reason we left these shoulders on is because when you're removing the wood, you're inevitably going to end up leaning on those shoulders just a little bit to lever things out, and I'll end up with a bit of a bruise on the wood if you were to cut it right back to the line. So what we've done is removed the worst of the wood, and now we're just going to remove these two bits in one go, so there'll be very little to lever out. In fairness, it should just come out in one go. And that is me down to my tape line, so I know that's all good now. We can take this out of our clamp. Now hopefully the wood should just fall out, but occasionally we will need to kind of go raking. Now it's very important that we don't lean on the sides this time. Okay, I'm just separating the wood down at the bottom there. I'm not leaning on my shoulders at all. That should be that all nicely cleared out and ready to accept our tenon. All we've got to do now is cut our little haunch on the side here. So last little bit of marking out that we're going to have to do here. We've taken our 6mm line down across the end from our mortise here. And what we're going to do is mark the depth of the haunch, which is 8mm in from the top surface. So I've set up my marking gauge to do this. We just mark that across there so we know where we're stopping. And just as we have done previously, we'll make it a little bit more obvious with our pencil. So that we know what it is we're taking out. And there you go. There is what we are going to saw out. So we're going to clamp this to our desk. We'll get our tenon saw at the ready. So unfortunately our camera battery died as we were doing the joint, but we can talk you through the process anyway. What we're going to do is, once we've got our marks there, we'll take our tenon saw, place it into the mortise that we've just made, and use that as a kind of fence to start our cut down either side of where our haunch is going to go. Okay, cut that down there as well, down to our mark. And the last thing we'll have to do is to chisel that through using our 6mm chisel. I like to do it flat side up, taking it down little layer at a time so as not to knock too much out by accident. So 2mm, 2mm, 2mm until you get right to the last little bit, millimetre off, and then finally by hand just take the last little ½ mm off yourself, because it won't put up too much of a fight. So now that we've got our mortise complete, all that's left to do is to fine tune our tenon until it fits in there perfectly. This is the reason I left this a little bit on the big side previously, is so that I could make sure it's an exact fit into our mortise at this stage. So what we're going to do is just trim a little bit off of either side of this tenon, check it, come back, trim a bit more if we need to, check it, and so forth. We've got our lines from previous to guide us as a starting point, where we can adjust from there. So, as we have done previously with our halving joints and such like, let's just establish our lines at the side, just by using our marking gauge mark. Okay, so this side's pretty much exactly where we want it to be. It was bang on the line on that point. I'm just going to shave a little bit off. Okay, I'll flip that one over. Check from this side. Again, this is pretty much bang on the line already, so we're just going to do a little bit of tidying more than anything. So I'm going to get rid of that little step left behind from when we cut earlier. Make sure that's a nice corner in there. Then we'll double check how things look. At this point, we've got the two joints almost fitting together. They're just getting a little bit tight, so I'm going to take a little bit more wood off of either side of our tenon so that fits in there a little bit easier. If I try and force it in, I run the risk of splitting the wood here. So we're going to take it out and just give it a little bit of a tidy up once more, and this should fit together nicely. Now, the last little thing you might need to do here is just make this tenon a tiny touch shorter. If you measured in from a line that we established at the start, you'll have a little bit of waste wood left on the end of the wood. So what to do is find that line along the edge there, and then we'll just transfer it down the side using our tri-square, and then either belt sand or cut it off. So now that we've tidied up our tenon a little bit, it's fitting much nicer into our mortise there. There's no noticeable gaps on either side, so this joint is pretty much done. All that's left for us to do is to take off the remaining waste wood from this end. We're going to do that by just sawing the worst of it away with our coping saw and then using our plane to finish it off. So just as we have done before, let's just cut in from the side with our coping saw, making sure that we're staying above our line. On all sides. There we go. And the little step that's left, we can finish with a plane. And there we go, that is our completed haunched mortise and tenon. Almost entirely invisible apart from the little haunch here. The haunch is just there to make sure that the joint doesn't go together the wrong way. Nice and strong, there's no glue in that, that is just friction holding that together. No gaps to be seen. This is the standard that you should be aiming for.